The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze in the doorway of my tiny apartment, my heart hammering in my chest. No one should be here. No one should know where I live. Not after everything. With trembling fingers, I unlatched the chain and cracked the door open, just enough to see. And then my world tilted. There he was. Ethan. My husband. The man who had vanished without a trace on our honeymoon. His clothes were tattered, his beard unkempt. His eyes, once warm and full of laughter, were hollow-haunted. He took a breath, voice raw and broken. "Anna," he whispered. "I need your help." Hi everyone. Welcome back to Ember Stories. Today, I have a heartfelt story to share with you. Get ready to feel all the emotions. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. Ethan stood in front of me, real and solid, but impossibly so. A year ago, he had disappeared in the middle of the night from our honeymoon suite in Santorini. One moment, he was beside me in bed, his arm draped over my waist. The next, he was gone. No signs of forced entry. No clues. Just vanished. Search teams scoured the island for weeks. Police questioned everyone. His passport and wallet were still in our hotel room. No security cameras caught him leaving. No one had seen him. Eventually, they ruled it a drowning accident. Maybe he had wandered outside, fallen into the sea. But I never believed that. I spent months searching on my own, following dead-end leads, combing through every piece of information I could find. But as the months dragged on, hope withered and grief took its place. By the time I moved back to the States, I was just a shell of myself. And now here he was. "Anna," Ethan said again, his voice hoarse. "Please, let me in." My fingers clenched the doorframe. Every rational part of me screamed to slam the door shut, to run, to call the police. Because if Ethan was alive, then where had he been? Why had he let me suffer, let me grieve? How? My voice cracked. How is this possible? Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the empty hallway behind him, like he expected someone to be watching. "I can't explain right now, but I swear, I never meant to leave you. I never wanted to disappear." I hesitated. My mind was a battlefield, fear, anger, confusion. But above it all, there was something more powerful. I still loved him. And despite everything, I needed to know the truth. Slowly I stepped aside. "Come in." Ethan moved past me, and as I shut the door, one thought chilled me to my core. Whatever had happened to him, it wasn't over yet. Ethan stepped inside, his movements stiff, as if every muscle in his body ached. The dim glow from the kitchen light cast deep shadows on his face, making him look even more gaunt. He hesitated near the couch, glancing around like a man who had forgotten what home felt like. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "Talk." He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his unkempt hair. "I don't know where to start. Try the part where you disappeared off the face of the earth." His eyes met mine, pain pleading. "I didn't leave you, Anna. I was taken." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Taken?" He nodded. "I don't remember much of that night. I woke up somewhere dark. Cold. Underground, I think. There were others." He stopped, pressing his lips together, as if he'd said too much. I took a cautious step forward. "Others? Who? Who took you?" Ethan hesitated. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know what they were, Anna. But they weren't human." I flinched. "What?" He shook his head, eyes darting to the window, his entire body coiled with tension. "I know how it sounds. I wouldn't believe it either. But I lived it. For a year. I lived in a place that shouldn't exist. I saw things that don't belong in this world." My stomach knotted. Was this trauma? A delusion? Or was there something else, something far worse, lurking beneath his words? "Ethan," I said carefully, "I want to believe you. But I need more than vague horrors and shadows. What exactly happened to you?" His hands clenched into fists. He turned away, as if struggling against some invisible force, debating whether to speak at all. Finally he exhaled, his voice hollow. "They put something inside me. The air left my lungs." "What do you mean?" He slowly unbuttoned his shirt. I gasped. A deep, jagged scar ran from the base of his throat down to his stomach, angry and red like it had been stitched together hastily. My hand flew to my mouth. "Oh my God!" Ethan's breathing was uneven. "I don't know what they did to me. But I feel it. I hear it. He touched his chest, wincing. It's inside me, Anna. And I don't know how much time I have before it takes over. Terror clawed up my spine. This wasn't just about a missing husband anymore. Something had come back with him. The room felt smaller, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I stared at Ethan's scar, my mind racing. What do you mean, takes over? I whispered. He pressed a hand against his chest like he was trying to hold something inside. It's not just me anymore, Anna. There's something else. I feel it moving, whispering. His voice shook. I don't sleep because when I do I see things. I hear them calling me back. Who? My voice was barely audible. Ethan flinched, like the question itself hurt. Then suddenly his entire body tensed. His head snapped toward the window. They're here. My blood turned to ice. Who? Them. A sharp click echoed through the silence. The lamp on my nightstand flickered. Then the overhead light went out. Darkness swallowed us. A soft hum vibrated through the floor. Not from outside, not from the street, but beneath us like something vast and alive was shifting underneath the apartment building. Ethan's breathing turned ragged. He gripped my arm, his skin clammy. Listen to me, he rasped. No matter what happens, don't let them take me again. Something scratched against the window. My stomach clenched. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I'd see. The glass was fogging over, as if something was breathing against it from the outside. And then, a single handprint appeared. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, tapering into sharp claw-like tips. The palm was distorted, too wide, too unnatural. It pressed harder against the glass, leaving behind a wet smear that glowed faintly in the dark. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate taps just like before. Ethan shuddered violently. His grip on me tightened. They know I'm here. The door handle twisted. I backed away, dragging Ethan with me. What do we do? They won't stop, he whispered. His eyes, once hazel, flickered with something unnatural, something wrong. They need me back. A low, reverberating click filled the room, like the sound of a lock turning, but from inside Ethan's chest. His body jerked. He let out a strangled gasp, his knees buckling. I caught him, panic clawing at my throat. Ethan! His back arched. His mouth opened in a silent scream. And then, the door burst open. The door crashed open, slamming against the wall with a force that sent picture frames toppling. A gust of freezing air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth, and something metallic, something wrong. Ethan convulsed in my arms. His fingers dug into my shoulders, his body rigid. His eyes, once so familiar, so human, glowed with an eerie pulsating light. No, I whispered, shaking him. Stay with me. Ethan, please. A figure stepped through the doorway. It wasn't a man. Tall, shadow-thin. Its elongated limbs moved in unnatural jerks, as if its bones were bending the wrong way. Its skin was smooth, colorless, shifting like liquid in the dim light. Where its face should have been, there was only a deep void, an absence that somehow looked back at me. Ethan let out a ragged breath. His grip loosened. He was slipping away. The creature tilted its head, that hollow face turning toward him. No. I shoved Ethan behind me, planting myself between him and the thing that had come to take him. You can't have him. My voice was raw, desperate. A sound filled the room. A low, reverberating hum, the same one I'd felt beneath the floor earlier. It vibrated through my bones, through my skull, whispering things I didn't understand but somehow felt. Ethan gasped behind me. Anna, you don't understand. I belong to them now. Tears burned in my eyes. No. No, you don't. The thing took a slow step forward. I could feel the air around it shift, warping, pulling. The space between us stretched, like reality itself was bending to its will. Ethan's body jerked again. His breath hitched. His eyes flickered, between human and something else. Something alien. He was losing himself. I had seconds to decide. I turned, grabbed Ethan's face in my hands. Fight it. Fight them. He shuddered violently. His hands came up, gripping my wrists like a lifeline. His eyes, flashing, flickering, searched mine. Then with a raw, gut-wrenching cry, he collapsed against me. A burst of energy exploded through the room. The creature shrieked, an unearthly, piercing sound that made the walls tremble. The air twisted, folding in on itself. And then, it was gone. The door slammed shut. The room was silent. Ethan sagged in my arms, gasping. His skin was clammy, his pulse weak, but he was still here. I held him tightly, pressing my forehead against his. Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I've got you," I whispered. "You're not going anywhere." He let out a shaky breath, his fingers curling into my shirt. "I don't know how long I can fight it." I swallowed hard. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." Outside the night was still, but deep beneath the earth, I swore I could still hear the hum. Waiting. Weeks passed. Ethan never spoke about that night. Not in words, at least. But I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands trembled when he thought I wasn't looking, in the way he sometimes stood by the window, staring out into the darkness, listening for something only he could hear. At first, things felt normal, or as normal as they could be. He moved through life like a man returned from war, haunted but trying. I held on to hope that we could rebuild, that love was enough to anchor him here in this world. But then the signs started. Small things at first. The static on the TV warping into a whisper, saying my name. A glass shattering on its own when Ethan walked into the room. The lights flickering, always at the same time, 3:33 a.m. And then one night, I woke up to find him standing over me. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Ethan." My voice was barely a whisper. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then his lips parted. "They're still inside me, Anna." A chill swept through me. "We'll fix this," I promised, reaching for him. He flinched, pulled back, and then he smiled. It wasn't his smile. It was too slow, too deliberate, too alien. My breath hitched. Somewhere beneath the floor, the hum started again. Waiting, growing. And this time I knew. They weren't done with him yet. They weren't done with us. It started 3 days after Ethan's confession. The hum beneath the floor grew louder at night. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that I was just traumatized. But then the cracks appeared. Thin, jagged fractures along the walls, the ceiling, almost imperceptible at first. But they spread like veins, like something underneath was pushing its way through. And Ethan, he was changing. I caught him whispering to himself, speaking in a language that made my skin crawl. He didn't eat much, barely slept. And sometimes, I'd wake up to find him standing at the window, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then one night, I woke to the feeling of breath against my ear. Not Ethan's. Something colder. I bolted upright. Ethan lay beside me, motionless. But the shadows in the room were wrong. They stretched too far, bending in ways they shouldn't. And then, a voice. A whisper. "Let him go." A rush of cold air swept through the room, and suddenly Ethan gasped, his body convulsing. His back arched off the bed, his eyes flying open, glowing, flickering, caught between here and somewhere else. I grabbed him, shaking him. "Ethan!" His mouth open, but it wasn't his voice that came out. "You should have let us take him." Terror crashed over me like a wave. "Leave him alone!" I screamed. The entire room shuddered. The light bulb above us burst, sending shards of glass raining down. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices echoing from inside Ethan's chest. And then, he went still, completely, terrifyingly still. A single breath left his lips. His fingers twitched. Then in a voice so soft, so broken, he whispered, "Anna, run." I didn't. Because whatever had come back with Ethan wasn't done with me yet. And neither was I. Ethan's whisper echoed in my mind. "Anna, run." But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. "I'm not leaving you." My voice was firm, but inside, I was unraveling. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. His skin was ice cold. Whatever had taken him a year ago, whatever had changed him, was still inside, clawing its way to the surface. The air in the room crackled with something unseen. The temperature had dropped, and the shadows on the walls flickered, twisting unnaturally. Then the hum returned. Louder. Closer. Ethan's back arched again. His fingers clawed at the sheets, his face contorted in agony. And then, the apartment split. A deafening crack tore through the air. And suddenly, the walls weren't walls anymore. They were something else. The entire room fractured, a shimmering divide slicing through reality like a wound. Through it I saw them. Tall figures, standing in an endless void. Their featureless faces tilted toward me watching. Studying, waiting. Ethan gasped, his body convulsing. His eyes snapped open wide with terror. They're pulling me back. No. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his skin. I won't let them. The figures stepped forward, their movements impossibly smooth, like gliding shadows. The space around us warped, stretching and shifting, pulling Ethan toward the fracture. I held on tighter, using every ounce of strength I had. Ethan, fight it! His jaw clenched. His fingers wrapped around mine. For a moment, it felt like he was winning. Like he was still here. Then, one of the figures raised a hand, and Ethan screamed. His body lurched toward the void, dragged by an unseen force. His grip slipped. No! I lunged forward, wrapping my arms around him. If they were taking him, they were taking me too. The figures tilted their heads, as if considering something. The hum intensified. No longer just a sound, but a pressure inside my skull, a command spoken in a language I couldn't understand. Then suddenly, everything went dark. Silence. Weightlessness. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't anywhere at all. I woke up to silence. A vast, aching silence that pressed against my ears, deeper than anything I had ever known. The air, if there was air, felt thick, heavy, like I was breathing in liquid shadow. The ground beneath me wasn't solid. It pulsed and shifted under my weight, like I was standing on something alive. I turned my head. Ethan was next to me, lying still. For one heart-stopping second, I thought he was dead. Then his chest rose in a shallow breath, and I exhaled in relief. I reached out, shaking his shoulder. Ethan, wake up. He didn't stir. I tried again, harder. Ethan. His eyes snapped open, and I jerked back. They weren't human anymore. The soft hazel was gone, replaced by something dark, swirling, shifting, like there was an entire galaxy trapped inside his pupils. I swallowed hard. Ethan. He sat up slowly, his movements unnatural, too precise. His head turned toward me, but he didn't speak. Something was wrong. I looked around, trying to make sense of where we were. It wasn't a room. It wasn't a place at all. It was just endless. An infinite expanse of darkness, punctuated by faint, pulsing lights in the distance, like stars, but wrong. They moved, twisting and stretching in ways that made my stomach churn. A low hum vibrated through the space. Not a sound, but a feeling. A presence. Then from the darkness they emerged. The figures. Tall. Endless. Watching. A cold wave of terror crashed over me. One of them stepped forward, its movements impossibly fluid. It tilted its head, and though it had no face, I felt its eyes on me. Ethan stood up beside me. His posture was stiff, his face blank. The figure raised a hand. You should not be here. The words didn't come from its mouth. There was no mouth. But I heard them inside my head, vibrating in my bones. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stand my ground. I'm not leaving without him. The figure didn't react. Instead, Ethan did. His head snapped toward me, and for the first time he spoke. You don't understand, Anna. His voice was layered, overlapping with something else. Something not human. I took a step back. Ethan, it's me. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but it was fleeting, like a dying ember in the dark. The figure extended its hand toward him. Come back. Ethan shuddered violently. His fingers twitched. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but then his entire body jerked. I grabbed his arm. Ethan, fight it. His eyes flickered, human for a second, then not. The void around us began to bend, pulling him toward the figures. I held on. I wasn't losing him again. The figure turned its faceless gaze to me, and for the first time, I felt something from it. Amusement. Like I was a child refusing to let go of a toy. You think you can save him? The hum grew louder. The darkness around us shifted. And then, Ethan screamed. His body arched backward, his mouth open in a soundless cry. The blackness in his eyes spread, crawling over his skin, his veins turning dark like ink. I shook him violently. Ethan, stay with me. His hands shot out, gripping my arms. His fingers dug into my skin, too strong, too tight. And then, just for a moment, his eyes met mine. And I saw him. The real Ethan. Fighting. Anna, run. But I didn't. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I pulled. Not just physically. I reached for him, for whatever was left of him inside that body. And I yanked him back. The void shattered. The figures recoiled. The hum turned into a piercing screech, and the entire space seemed to crack, like glass under pressure. Then suddenly, I was falling. Darkness swallowed me whole. And the last thing I heard before everything went silent was Ethan whispering my name. I was falling, but there was no wind. No sensation. Just the endless, crushing weight of darkness pulling me down. And then, pain. I slammed into something solid, the impact rattling my bones. My lungs burned as I gasped for air, but it felt thick, wrong, heavy. I opened my eyes. I was somewhere else. The sky above me wasn't a sky at all. It was shifting liquid black, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air smelled metallic, electric. The ground beneath me was cold stone, slick with something I didn't want to identify. And Ethan, he was there, lying a few feet away, motionless. I scrambled toward him, pressing my hands against his face. His skin was too pale, his breathing too shallow. Ethan, wake up. Nothing. Panic clawed at my chest. I shook him harder. Ethan. His body jerked. And then his eyes opened. They weren't black anymore. They weren't glowing. They were just Ethan's eyes. He blinked slowly, like waking from a deep sleep. Anna. A sob of relief caught in my throat. Yes, I'm here. I helped him sit up, gripping his arms. Are you okay? He swallowed hard. His voice cracked. I don't know. I glanced around. Where are we? The landscape stretched out endlessly, massive, jagged ruins rising from the ground like broken ribs, ancient and crumbling. In the distance, towering monoliths stood in perfect unnatural formation, their surfaces covered in shifting symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. And the hum was everywhere. Not distant anymore. It was inside me, inside my bones, inside my mind. Ethan exhaled shakily. We're not supposed to be here. No kidding. A sound echoed through the ruins, a low guttural clicking. Not human. I turned slowly. Beyond the crumbling stone, something was moving. Tall. Too tall. Its limbs were long and spindly, its movements unnatural. Its head tilted, twitching slightly as though listening. Then, it started coming toward us. I grabbed Ethan's hand. We have to run. He didn't argue. We took off through the ruins, the ground uneven beneath us. The air grew colder with every step, the humming intensifying. The clicking behind us quickened, it was following. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it gaining on us. Ethan stumbled beside me, his breath ragged. There, he pointed ahead. There's something. A structure loomed in the distance, massive and ancient, covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. A doorway. A way out. We sprinted toward it, the air crackling with energy. The ground shook. And just as we reached the threshold, the creature lunged. A clawed hand wrapped around my ankle, yanking me backward. I hit the ground hard, gasping as ice-cold fingers dug into my skin. Ethan turned, his face twisted in horror. Anna! The thing pulled, dragging me toward the dark. My nails scraped against the stone, but it was useless. Then, Ethan grabbed me. His hands locked around my wrists, his grip unshakable. The thing shrieked, its voice piercing, rattling through my skull. And then Ethan spoke. Not in English. Not in any human language. It was the same voice I had heard before, deep, layered, ancient. A single word. The air split open. A shockwave of energy ripped through the ruins. The creature howled as it was flung backward, its form dissolving into the void. And then silence. I gasped for breath, my body trembling. Ethan. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own hands. His fingers trembled. I remember, he whispered. His voice was hollow. A chill ran down my spine. Remember what? Slowly, he turned to face me. And the look in his eyes made my stomach drop. What I am. What I am. The words sent a bolt of ice through my veins. Ethan wasn't looking at me. His hands trembled, his breathing uneven. It was like he was coming apart at the seams. Like something inside him was struggling to take shape. I shook my head. No. You're Ethan. You're my husband. He closed his eyes. I was. The ruins around us pulsed, the air thick with an unseen presence. The symbols carved into the stone shifted, twisting into new patterns, ones I recognized. They were the same markings from our honeymoon suite. The same markings that had appeared the night he vanished. Realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. This wasn't the first time Ethan had been here. This wasn't the first time they had taken him. Ethan, I whispered. What did they do to you? He flinched. A sharp, shuddering inhale. His voice cracked. I wasn't supposed to come back, Anna. The ground beneath us trembled. A distant howl echoed through the void, deep, resonant, like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. They had found us. Ethan clenched his fists. They won't let me go. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. Then we fight. He let out a bitter laugh. You don't understand. I'm not human anymore. I shook my head. I don't care. The symbols flared, pulsing with an eerie blue light. The hum grew louder, shaking the ruins around us. And then, the sky split open. A massive tear, jagged and unnatural, forming above us. Through it I saw them. Not just the figures from before. Something bigger. Vast shifting shapes, impossibly large, stretching across a void that shouldn't exist. Their forms unfolded like tendrils, reaching, expanding, pulling at the edges of reality itself. And at the center of it all, a shape I knew, a shape I feared, a shape that had once been Ethan. But not this Ethan. Something older. Something waiting. My stomach turned. Ethan, what is that? He exhaled shakily. The real me. The tendrils above us moved, reaching for him, calling him back. The hum became a deafening roar, vibrating through my skull. And for the first time, I saw the choice in his eyes. Stay with me, or return to what he was. I refused to let that happen. I grabbed him, pulling him toward the ancient doorway. You're not leaving me again. The figures loomed closer, their faceless heads tilting. He belongs to us. Ethan gritted his teeth. His body shook, flickering between human and something else. His veins pulsed with dark energy. His skin glowing with the same shifting light as the symbols on the ruins. I held him tighter. You're still Ethan, I whispered. Come home with me. His fingers dug into my arms. And then in a single terrifying moment, he made his choice. Ethan turned toward the figures. His jaw clenched. His entire body tensed, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss. Then, he stepped toward me. The air ripped apart around us. A blinding light swallowed everything. And suddenly, I was falling again. But this time I wasn't alone. I was falling, but this time, Ethan was falling with me. His hand was in mine, his grip tight, desperate. The void around us twisted and churned, but something had changed. The humming was still there, the presence of them still pressing against the edges of reality, but we were breaking through. Then, a sudden pull. The world lurched and we hit the ground. Pain shot through my body as I gasped for air. I was on solid earth again. Cold hardwood beneath my palms. Wood. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to dim, flickering light. I knew this place. I was back in my apartment. The living room. The coffee table overturned. The clock on the wall frozen at 3:33 a.m. I turned my head. Ethan was next to me, gasping, shaking. His skin was damp with sweat, his hands gripping the floor as if anchoring himself. It was real. We were back. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, Ethan exhaled shakily, lifting his head. His eyes were human again. No darkness, no shifting galaxies, no lingering traces of whatever had tried to claim him. Anna. His voice broke. I remember everything. I reached for him. You're here. You chose to stay. He nodded slowly, his breath unsteady. They tried to take me back. But I fought it. I fought them. He swallowed hard. Because of you. I pressed my forehead against his, my hands cupping his face. You never have to go back. But even as I said it, I knew. They weren't done with him. The lights in the apartment flickered. The air shifted. The humming hadn't stopped. Ethan's expression darkened. They're still watching. My stomach turned. Then what do we do? He looked at me, something unreadable in his eyes. There's one last door, Anna. The floor beneath us rippled. A jagged, black tear appeared in the space between the couch and the hallway. A doorway that hadn't been there before. It pulsed with the same energy as the fracture that had taken him a year ago. Only this time, we weren't being dragged through it. Ethan's fingers curled around mine. If we go through, he said. We end this. We close it for good. A lump formed in my throat. And if we don't? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because deep down I already knew. If we didn't go through that door, if we ignored it, they would come back. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day they'd return. And next time, they might not give Ethan a choice. I swallowed hard. Then I nodded. Let's finish this. Ethan squeezed my hand. And together, we stepped through the last door. Darkness swallowed us, then light. Ethan raised his hand. The void shattered. The figures faded. We woke up home. The last door was gone. Ethan squeezed my hand. We're free. And at last I believed him.